So I don't think there's anyone on this planet that hasn't seen the Switch 2 trailer. Months and years of speculation have led up to this moment, and now that it's here, it's time for some more speculation. Overall, I'm optimistic. A power upgrade alone will be fantastic no matter what other features the console might bring. According to most leaks, it's looking like it will be around as powerful as a PS4, maybe a PS4 Pro, but it was very much a visual trailer with very little features actually confirmed, but one thing that is absolutely for sure is that it will be compatible with original Switch cartridges. Right from the bat, I want to make two things clear. Backwards compatibility and physical media are both important. However, this implies that Switch 2 games will run on the same or at least very similar cartridge technology as the original Switch. And that has me concerned. Switch cartridges have always been a challenge for developers. For context, Black Ops 6 takes up around 100 gigabytes of storage. Baldur's Gate 3 takes up about 125, Red Dead Redemption 2 takes up around 150. The average Switch game card can hold 16. Yikes. Storage technology has absolutely improved since the original Switch, but the question remains, are these tiny carts going to become a bottleneck as games get bigger and more ambitious? I love physical media, but if the new console is meant to rival more powerful systems, I don't know if the cartridge format's going to keep pace. At least for third parties, this could be a major problem for a system that otherwise might have the power to deliver gaming experiences way beyond what the Switch is capable of. Am I saying that Nintendo should have forced a disk drive into their handheld? Probably not. There's no easy answer, but I do think it's worth discussing. Today I want to cover a bit of the history of Nintendo's proprietary media, the major drawbacks of Nintendo's cartridge format, and how it could affect the future of the Switch 2. Welcome to Zesty Tech, by the way. Be sure to hit the subscribe button for more tech commentary videos, and as we explore the subject, be sure to join the conversation in the comments below. We're a pretty small community, so there's a good chance that I'll respond to your comment. So, let's start with Nintendo's history of proprietary media. It's a long one. In fact, it's been part of the company's identity for decades. Going all the way back to the original NES, Nintendo used its own cartridge format that helped reduce piracy and maintain control over the production and licensing. This worked pretty well throughout the NES and SNES era, but when it came time for the N64 and the advent of discs, there was a problem. When the N64 debuted, it continued using cartridges at a time when competitors like Sony's PlayStation had moved to CD-based media. Cartridges did offer some advantages, faster load times and more durability, but they were also significantly more expensive to manufacture. Their capacity was far lower than that of CDs, so developers had to cram their games into only a fraction of the storage space available on PlayStation discs. This led to higher production costs, more compressed audio and video, and sometimes fewer features or cut content. Some high-profile developers found it easier to just jump ship to PlayStation, which allowed them to store more content on cheaper media, ultimately resulting in some heavy-hitting third-party titles never making their way to the N64. If Nintendo's strength was its first-party games, then the strength of the PlayStation was absolutely third parties. And it's kind of been that way ever since. By the time the GameCube came around, Nintendo did adopt an optical format, but it was still proprietary. A mini DVD-like disc with a capacity of roughly 1.5 gigabytes, which was smaller than the standard DVDs used by the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. Those could usually store around 4.7 gigabytes or more per disc. While the smaller discs were meant to reduce piracy, Nintendo is terrified of piracy, and speed up load times somewhat, they also came with a storage disadvantage. When the Wii launched, Nintendo still used a proprietary disc format, this time closer to a full-size DVD, and on the Wii U they used a high-capacity proprietary optical disc. It was smooth. These discs were generally more in line with industry standards, but still carried Nintendo's own twist for security and anti-piracy. On the handheld side, from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance and then the DS to the 3DS, Nintendo continued using cartridges or game cards, often citing durability, faster loading, and portability as key benefits. It seems like a no-brainer that of course portable systems would use cartridges, but think of the PSP, that one still had a disc. Had some problems because of it, but it still had a disc. The shift to the Switch felt like a modern callback to those earlier cartridge-based systems, or maybe more of a straight line straight from the 3DS to the Switch. What we're seeing with the Switch 2 is potentially another iteration of the same debate. Nintendo's insistence on proprietary media means storage constraints and production costs remained a hot-button issue. So let's talk about the specs of the existing Nintendo Switch cartridges, because these are the baseline. Nintendo Switch cartridges typically range from 1GB up to 32GB, with Nintendo once planning but never widely adapting a 64GB version. They achieve read speeds generally around 20 to 30 megabytes per second, faster than optical discs but usually slower than high-end microSD cards. Unlike off-the-shelf flash storage, they incorporate unique security measures and specialized memory format designed specifically for Switch hardware. It's not publicly available how much publishers are charged per game card, but we know it's significantly more than the discs used for the PS5 or Xbox Series consoles. Reportedly, it's a pretty steep jump in price between each card capacity, so it becomes significantly unappealing to bring large games to the Switch even if it would be capable of running them. Developers can either compress the heck out of their games at the expense of things like texture quality, or they can give you the worst of both worlds, where you don't get to own your game and you can't play it without the cartridge. It takes away the purpose of buying a physical copy in the first place. If you have to download half the game, it starts to feel like you purchased a license key on a tiny piece of plastic rather than a complete product. In 20 years, when Nintendo's servers are gone, it won't matter that you have a physical version of the game. You don't own the game, so what's the point? Now, that's the Switch. Those are what Switch cards were capable of. The technology has absolutely evolved. Just because the Switch 2 has the same card slot doesn't mean they would be the same cards. Tiny forms of flash storage can hold an insane amount of data. We see micro SD cards with 1 or even 2 terabytes of storage on the market. Granted, they're not cheap, but the fact that they exist proves that you can cram a lot of memory into something the size of your fingernail. So if we can do that with a consumer-grade microSD card, why not just offer bigger Switch cartridges that also fit inside the same small slot? In theory, Nintendo or its manufacturing partners could. This key roadblock, though, is cost. The higher capacity and faster the speeds, the more expensive each cartridge becomes. That's a problem if you're trying to mass produce 1 million copies of a game at retail. For a frame of reference, an SD card with 64GB of storage will cost you around $10 to $15 or so. Naturally, that becomes cheaper if you're a large company buying in bulk, but considering that this would be proprietary, that would likely bring the price back up. If around 15% of a $60 game is spent on the media to hold it, yikes. So while I do think it's silly to say, well, it's the same card slot, so obviously the cards have to be the exact same technology, I do have serious doubts that it would be enough to lower the costs. That is, however, all speculation. No one outside of the game industry would know how much the manufacturing cost would be for Nintendo, but why should we even care? Someone please think of the company's profit margins. The biggest reason is that this can be a major determining factor for what the Switch 2 will actually be capable of. It can have the most incredible graphics capability in the world. But if it can't hold games, then what's it all for? Now, that said, modern games are often bloated with uncompressed textures or redundant data. Many games don't need to be as massive as they are. Nintendo's not going to have a problem. Nintendo's really good at optimizing their own games. They're used to working with these tiny cartridges, so I'm not worried about first parties. All of this comes down to third parties, just like the N64 era. Okay, so you've made it this far in the video, so I'm going to hit you with my controversial opinion. I think the Switch 2 should basically be digital only. It has a card slot, it's going to be able to play physical media, and there's no reason that a game that could fit on a cartridge shouldn't be released physically, but I think that we should go in with the expectation that the vast majority of Switch 2 games are going to be digital only. There's always the option for part of the games to be included on a game card, and I guess there still is an advantage there because you can trade and sell your license keys to games, even though they don't hold the full game. There is that. So I guess that's something. But if the main issue is that games won't be ported to the Switch because they don't fit a physical release, I think Nintendo should probably just market it as a digital-first console. I do not want to see physical media go away. It is still important, and I'm not, excited by the idea of, oh man, I'm so happy that Sony got rid of their disk drive. That was the one problem I had with the PS5, I'll tell you what. Console manufacturers are dragging their users kicking and screaming towards digital-only consoles. But recently I've been playing a lot of my Steam Deck, and I'm not mad that it doesn't have a disk drive. I guess the biggest difference is that Valve is way more trustworthy when it comes to digital stores than Nintendo is. If all the Switch games live on Nintendo's servers, they're only going to be there so long. With Valve, I at least know that no matter what, probably, maybe, almost certainly, it's going to be okay. Or if I bought the license to the game is pretty much mine. I know there was some recent fine print issues with Steam, so there's that. But overall, the PC market has moved to digital only a long time before consoles did, and it's worked out pretty well. I still don't trust Nintendo though. I guess the biggest thing is that if they're going to make it a digital only console, they need to lean into that, and it better be a good digital only console. By that I mean lots of storage for one thing. They also need to improve their account system. If you're gonna make people reliant on your store, you better make people feel better about buying things from your store. I want to make sure that if I buy a game, it stays mine. They also need to make some sort of long-term commitment to digital preservation. That's doesn't sound like Nintendo at all. But without making some of these steps, I don't trust Nintendo to do a digital-only console, but I also don't see any way that they can't do a digital-only console. I don't want to lose all my games when Nintendo decides to move on. And maybe we could have something in between. Obviously, games that are small enough should absolutely have a physical release. First-party games almost certainly will have a physical release. Nintendo is gonna put in the work to make it work no matter what. The biggest thing is I don't want it to be a limitation. I don't want it to be a bottleneck for what games are brought to Switch. And that hasn't been a huge problem on Switch, but the biggest thing is that the Switch has its own bottlenecking issues. Having a game that's streaming only isn't because the Switch can't hold it, it's because the Switch can't play it. We could also see more of a compromise, more physical cartridges for collectors. That way the price of the cartridges could be supplemented for a more expensive edition of the game, and then you get to actually own it, which has a lot of value. But the default expectation for most players is that they would purchase and play games digitally, similar to how the Steam Deck operates now. So to wrap this up, yes, it's entirely possible to fit much larger storage into the same cartridge size. The technology exists, and microSD cards are the proof. The real trouble is whether it will be cost-effective for Nintendo and publishers. Maybe they found ways to keep the manufacturing costs low enough that it's practical, or at least they need to make a commitment to make people trust a digital-only console from Nintendo. Nothing's actually announced yet. We don't know anything for sure. This is just me being negative about a console that we barely know anything about. By all means, take the hype train for a ride. I would love to hear what you think. Are you okay with partial downloads, or do you think it might be better to just move on to digital only? Do you already rely on digital anyway, so it doesn't really bother you? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed listening to me run my mouth, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more discussions about the Switch 2 and all things tech. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.